So what if I told you that looking your boss in the eye, screaming I quit, packing your personal belongings into a cardboard box, and storming out the front door legally doesn't actually mean you've quit your job?
I mean, it sounds ridiculous, right? But it's true.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we all have that fantasy on a terrible Tuesday, the urge to just pull the ripcord and walk away.
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe your version is lying in bed at 4 in the morning, staring at your phone and drafting this wildly emotional, typo-filled resignation email.
Yeah, the classic late night mistake.
Exactly. So today we are doing a deep dive into the bizarre legal loophole of the heat of the moment resignation. The mission here is to explore the shocking legal realities behind these sudden exits and the incredibly complex mechanics of unfair dismissal.
Yeah, and to figure out how this actually works, we're pulling back the curtain on some incredible case files from the Australian Workplace Discrimination Representatives, or AWDR.
Right.
They are the leading non-lawyer workplace and discrimination representatives in Australia. They basically field calls around the clock from people who are in this exact acute state of panic
Wow, so they see this happen in real time.
all the time. Over the last 30 years, they have provided guidance, support, and defense for over 16,000 clients facing, unfair dismissals, toxic environments, sudden terminations.
That is a massive amount of data.
It really is. And because they handle these crises in real time, their records show us exactly where the legal lines are drawn.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources they provided contain two real-world rulings from the Fair Work Commission that just completely dismantle how most of us think employment works.
Yeah, they really turn the whole concept of quitting upside down.
We are going to look at the granular details of those two cases. But before we get to the cinematic office breakdowns, we need a baseline. So, in Australia, according to the AWDR guidance, an unfair dismissal occurs when an employee is let go in an unjust manner without a valid reason, or when the employer skips the mandatory termination protocols.
Right, like if they don't follow the proper steps.
Exactly. Like, if my boss fires me on a whim without a formal warning, that is an unfair dismissal.
Yeah, that's the textbook definition.
Yeah.
But the AWDR case files plunge us into a much grayer area.
Which is what we're here for.
Right. The framework of employment law gets incredibly murky when the employee is the one who initiates the termination, but later claims it was not a genuine choice.
Which just sounds so counterintuitive.
It does. But the Fair Work Commission operates under this concept called special circumstances. They acknowledge that a resignation isn't just a physical action. It actually relies on the state of mind of the person taking that action.
Wait, let me push back on that immediately.
Sure, go for it.
Because if I type an email that says, I resign, or I verbally tell my manager I'm done, I initiated that process.
You did, yeah.
I made the choice, so I own the consequences. It just seems completely contradictory for an employee to walk away and then claim the employer unfairly dismissed them. Doesn't the responsibility fall entirely on the person who walked away?
Well, what's fascinating here is that quitting isn't just saying a word. Legally, it is the voluntary termination of a binding contract.
Okay.
Think about it like this. If you sign a 30-year mortgage while under extreme psychological duress or while suffering a severe mental health crisis, a court will void that contract because you lacked the legal capacity to consent.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right. The Fair Work Commission is applying that exact same contract logic to your job. The core legal question they ask is whether the resignation was truly unambiguous and voluntary.
Unambiguous and voluntary.
Exactly. If you're having a mental breakdown, the Commission recognizes that you might not possess the capacity to voluntarily sever your employment contract. And if the resignation wasn't legally valid, but the company forces you out the door anyway,
Then your resignation officially transforms into an unfair dismissal.
you nailed it.
That is wild. So the law is actively pausing to ask if the person was in their right mind. That completely shifts the burden of responsibility.
It really does. It puts a lot of onus on the employer to read the situation correctly.
So to see how these special circumstances function under pressure, let's look at the first AWDR case study. This involves a Sydney stevedore named David Gourlay, and this happened in 2024.
Oh, man. Gourlay's timeline is an absolute masterclass in how quickly an emotional spiral can become a massive legal battle.
It really is. So Gourlay had been working as a stevedore at Sydney International Container Terminals down at Port Botany since late 2016. And the historical context here is super vital.
Extremely vital. Yeah.
He was not flying under the radar. The company had previously placed him on 6 different absence management plans because he repeatedly exceeded his personal leave.
6 plans is a lot.
Right. They actually required him to provide a medical certificate for every single day he took off.
So the employer already views him through this lens of unreliability. He is heavily monitored, which means they are highly sensitive to any friction regarding his employment status.
Exactly. So leading up to the critical incident in September 2024, Gourlay had been absent for roughly 10 weeks.
Wow, 10 weeks.
Yeah. And in his Fair Work claim, he explicitly stated this extended absence was due to experiencing seriously paranoid thought processes.
Yeah.
So he is navigating a severe mental health crisis.
Right, he is in a very vulnerable state.
And on September 25, 2024, he finally returns for a shift. Almost immediately, he receives devastating news. The union and the company have agreed to reduce the working hours for all stevedores due to a massive downturn in work at the port.
Which, for someone already battling paranoia, a sudden threat to their livelihood is just the ultimate trigger.
It's the worst possible news at the worst possible time. Gourlay completely panics. He interprets the reduction in hours to mean his income is going to vanish entirely.
I know.
The news sends his paranoid thoughts into overdrive. He goes home, but he can't sleep. In the middle of the night, he starts firing off erratic emails to his coworkers, wildly accusing them of conspiring against him. It is a full-blown crisis.
It sounds terrifying for him, honestly.
It really does. Finally, at exactly 4:31 a.m., he sends an email directly to the company's generic HR address. It's brief, and it's heavily typo-written.
Yeah, I remember reading this part.
It literally reads, quote, "To whom may concern, I, David Gourlay, resignation as of today."
End quote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And after hitting send, he finally goes to sleep.
See, the timestamp of 4:31 a.m., combined with that disjointed grammar, that is the first major signal that this is not a calculated professional decision.
Right. But the morning rolls around. At 11:02 a.m., an HR manager opens the inbox, sees the email, and replies. They formally accept his resignation, thank him for his work, and they process it.
They just push it right through.
They do. But just 22 minutes later, at 11:24 a.m., Gourlay wakes up. The adrenaline is gone. He realizes what he has done, and he instantly replies.
The immediate regret.
Completely. He writes, quote, "Sorry, disregard my previous email. I wasn't thinking straight due to stress. I'll be in tonight for a night shift."
That 22-minute gap is the entire battlefield of this case. That is literally the only window between the company accepting the resignation and the employee desperately trying to pull it back.
It's crazy to think about. I mean, if you are listening to this and you have just fired off a deeply angry or panicked email to your boss, the clock is ticking right now.
It really is.
The difference between keeping your career and losing your livelihood isn't just about what you typed in the heat of the moment. It is about how many minutes pass before you send the follow-up retracting it.
Exactly. Time is of the essence.
But in Gourlay's case, the company doesn't reply to his retraction. They just let the afternoon pass. Finally, at 6:09 p.m., HR emails him back and tells him it is too late. They state the resignation has already been processed through payroll and his employment is over.
So the employer is just clinging to the technicality here. When Gourlay files his unfair dismissal claim, the company's defense is incredibly rigid.
What was their main argument?
Well, they argued the text of the 4:31 a.m. email was unambiguous. He used the word resignation. They also lean heavily on his history of absences, arguing that he was highly unreliable and that accepting his sudden resignation was just a standard operational decision.
They're making it sound very transactional.
Very. They present it as a closed loop.
Mm-hmm.
He offered to quit, they accepted, the system updated, boom, done.
And initially, the Fair Work Commission agreed with that rigid timeline, right?
They did, yeah. The first ruling acknowledged that Gourlay was suffering from mental confusion. However, the commission determined that because the employer did not possess explicit knowledge of his mental confusion at the exact second they processed the payroll at 11:02 a.m., the resignation was legally effective.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they dismissed Gourlay's claim, basically calling the company's decision tough but legal.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because Gourlay doesn't just give up. He appeals the decision to the full bench of the Fair Work Commission, and this is where the legal precedent completely shifts.
Thank goodness, because that initial ruling treats the employment relationship like a vending machine. Button pressed, contract dispensed.
Right.
But the full bench overturns the initial ruling because they dive deeper into the mechanism of special circumstances. The crucial aha moment here is that the law requires a broader view of what the employer should reasonably know.
Because the full bench looked at the warning signs the company ignored, right?
They absolutely did. A company cannot ruthlessly exploit a 22-minute window just because it is convenient for payroll. The full bench ruled that a reasonable amount of time must be allowed to lapse to see if a 4.31 a.m. resignation is truly intended.
That makes so much more sense.
And more importantly, they uncovered a massive oversight.
Oh, yeah. This part is wild.
Shortly after Gourlay sent his overnight emails, two coworkers and the union branch secretary had actually contacted the company management.
They called them directly.
They did. They explicitly warned the company that Gourlay was experiencing a mental health crisis.
So the employer's willful ignorance is what weaponized the resignation. I mean, they had the context from the union, but they just chose to look the other way because processing the resignation solved their problem with a difficult employee.
Exactly. And that willful ignorance transforms the situation entirely. The full bench determined that the company failed to act with basic human diligence. They ordered the claim to be reheard.
Wow.
It establishes that an employer cannot hide behind a digital timestamp when they have clear signals that the employee lacks the capacity to terminate their contract.
Okay, but Gourlay had a digital safety net in a way. He had
Yeah.
physical distance from his employer, and he had that 22-minute gap while people slept.
True.
What happens if you strip the digital barrier away entirely? What if you are face-to-face with your boss, shouting, and you literally physically pack up your desk?
That is a completely different level of intensity.
It is, and that brings us to our second case from the AWDR files, which takes place in 2025 with a woman named Karen Burns.
Yeah, the Gourlay case is about severe clinical paranoia. But the Burns case, this is about a simple, deeply unfortunate miscommunication that just escalates into a professional disaster.
Right. So Karen Burns was a receptionist at a podiatry clinic in Canberra called M&R Clayton. She had been working there since 2019. We are talking about 8 years of steady, loyal service here.
8 years is a long time to build trust.
It really is. Her regular schedule was 3 days a week.
Huh?
On July 16th, 2025, she is at work when the clinic owner, Mark Clayton, tells her to go home early because there were no patients booked.
Okay.
She asks if she will be paid for the remainder of her shift, and he tells her no.
Oh, wow. So she is instantly put on the defensive financially. Her income for the day has just evaporated without warning.
Exactly. So the tension is already high. Then Clayton tells her he is making a permanent change to her schedule. He states he is reducing her ongoing weekly hours to 2.5 days a week.
2.5 days.
But through the stress of the moment, Burns mishears him. She thinks he said he is reducing her hours to 2 half-days.
Oh, no. A reduction to 2 half-days is a massive, life-altering pay cut.
It's huge.
It also makes zero logistical sense for running the front desk of a medical clinic.
Not at all. So she is highly distressed. She believes her livelihood has just been gutted. So she has a heated, emotional outburst right in the middle of the clinic in front of another staff member.
Oh, boy.
She loudly declares she, quote, may as well quit. She then physically clears all of her personal belongings out of her desk, puts them in a bag, and walks out the front door.
See, it is a highly theatrical exit. It has all the hallmarks of a permanent departure.
Right. Hold on. I have to stop you there. I can understand the 4 a.m. typo email being debatable,
Sure.
but she stood in the office, loudly announced her resignation to witnesses, packed her physical belongings into a box, and walked out the front door in the middle of the workday.
Yeah, it's pretty extreme.
In any universe, that is quitting. I just don't see how the commission could possibly defend her here.
It certainly looks definitive, I'll give you that.
Right.
But the commission looks at the timeline of retraction to determine the true intent.
Okay.
That evening, her boss emails her to officially accept the resignation, stating he is sad it ended that way. But the very next morning, Burns realizes her mistake. She realizes he said 2.5 days, not 2 half-days.
The moment of clarity.
Exactly. She immediately emails him back. She clarifies the misunderstanding, explicitly states she wants to stay, and notes that she is happy to discuss the 2.5-day schedule.
She even shows up for her next scheduled shift on July 22, ready to work.
She does. She arrives at the clinic, and the boss refuses to let her stay. He demands she hand over her keys and tells her to leave. He argues that her position is no longer tenable after her emotional outburst, and he adds that the business is slowing down anyway.
So he's treating the desk packing as an ironclad termination.
Right. So Burns takes this to the Fair Work Commission, arguing that the outburst was a heat-of-the-moment reaction based on a completely false premise.
Because she misheard him.
Exactly. This raises an important question for the commission. They have to evaluate her intent when her physical actions seem so final.
And what did they focus on?
They focused heavily on her prompt attempt to correct the record. Because she moved so quickly the very next morning to fix the misunderstanding, The commission determined she did not possess a real intention to resign. She was reacting to a phantom threat.
A phantom threat. That's a great way to phrase it. So the intent is the anchor of the whole legal argument. If you don't intend to sever the contract remains intact.
That's exactly it. The commission ruled that after 8 years of steady, loyal service, the employer owed her a cooling-off period. A business owner just cannot take an angry outburst from an 8-year veteran employee as binding without letting the dust settle overnight.
But wait, there's another massive legal precedent established in the Burns case regarding the employer's behavior. Usually people assume a heat-of-the-moment resignation is only reversible if the boss provoked it.
Right.
Like if the employer was screaming, acting abusively, or creating a hostile work environment.
Yeah, but the commission ruled that employer misconduct is not a necessary element. Yeah. The boss in this scenario, Mark Clayton, was relatively calm. He just delivered a routine scheduling update.
Which she just misunderstood.
Right. But the commission established that even if the boss does everything right, if the employee is in a state of severe emotional stress, their resignation can still be legally ineffective.
Wow.
The presence of acute distress on the employee's part is enough to hit the pause button on the entire process.
That is incredible. So the commission found the dismissal was harsh and unfair. Now, the podiatry clinic argued they were actually closing down their business completely in September 2025 anyway, so they couldn't reinstate her to her previous role even if they wanted to.
Right. Reinstatement was off the table.
Since it was impossible, the commission ordered the clinic to pay Burns $4,090.50. And that specific amount was exactly the equivalent of the 5 weeks' pay she would have earned before the business permanently closed its doors.
It's just fascinating. When you synthesize the Gourlay and Burns cases, it is actually profoundly reassuring.
How?
Well, it shows that a resignation is not an unbreakable spell. If it is born out of acute emotional distress, a diagnosed mental health crisis, or even just a momentary misinterpretation of facts, the law in Australia leaves room for human error.
That's a nice way to look at it.
It recognizes the fundamental human need to walk away, cool down, and just reassess the situation with a clear head.
Okay, but there is a very practical structural warning embedded in the EWDR case files that we have to talk about. While the law is forgiving of the outburst itself, it is entirely ruthless about the timeline for seeking intervention.
Very true. The Fair Work Commission enforces strict deadlines. If you find yourself in a situation like Gourlay or Burns, where you have retracted a heat-of-the-moment resignation and your employer refuses to accept your retraction,
Wow.
you only have 21 days from the official end of your employment to lodge a claim.
21 days vanishes instantly when you are paralyzed by the stress of losing your income. Why is the deadline so incredibly short?
It is a structural compromise. The law needs to balance the protection of the worker with the operational certainty of the business.
Makes sense.
The 21-day limit gives the employee enough time to find support through an organization like AWDR, but it ensures the employer isn't left in legal limbo for months while trying to hire a replacement.
So if you miss it, you're out of luck.
If you miss that 21-day window, your legal options evaporate, regardless of how unfair or chaotic your departure was. You have rights, but you have to act on them immediately.
So what does this all mean for us? We live in an era of completely frictionless communication. A single click on an email at 4 in the morning or a sudden explosive misunderstanding in a hallway can instantly sever professional ties that took nearly a decade to build.
Yeah, it's scary how fast it can happen.
We are surrounded by payroll systems and digital HR platforms that demand immediate processing. We are basically treating human beings like algorithms.
But these rulings show that the law is actively fighting back against that digital acceleration. Human emotions do not operate on a binary code. We panic, we mishear things, and our mental health fluctuates.
Absolutely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes you wonder how many other seemingly absolute decisions in our professional lives, decisions that cost people their entire careers, might actually be entirely reversible if we just built in the grace of a mandatory 24-hour cooling-off period.
That is such a good point. The next time you are having that terrible day and you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 4 in the morning drafting a dramatic resignation email in your head, maybe just leave it in the drafts folder.
Good advice.
But if you do hit send or if you do pack up your desk, remember that the sun is going to come up, the adrenaline is going to fade, and depending on how fast you move to correct the record, you might just be able to take it all back.